So this is the higher paper 2018. First question then was looking at electrolysis and asked you to plot a graph of the mean results. Okay. Needs to be a straight line. Okay. Even though it says a line, that can sometimes be a curve. So don't be confused by it. But this one was definitely a straight line going through the origin. Okay. So 3 marks for a nice graph to get you started. Then it asked you to calculate the furthest from the mean, take away the mean, divide by the mean, times by 100 should have given you that value. You could have done it with a 7.8 and it would just given you a negative value, but it would still be the same thing, okay? Give the most likely reason why the mass of copper was lower. Copper fell to the bottom of the beaker. Moving on then to electrolysis of aluminium. Think about panic. They're asking you where aluminium would have gone. You could have looked up aluminium. It's positive on the table of ions. It retracted to the negative cathode because opposites attract, okay? Aluminium oxide is going to break down into aluminium and oxygen, and then you had to balance it out, okay? Then it asked you to form the formula for potassium carbonate. So just doing top swap, drop, okay? Nice, easy, 1 mark. Be careful of this question then. First off, just label the reactants and the products, okay? Be careful of this question because it's asking you to do when all the bonds in carbon dioxide and water molecules are formed. So it's asking you to do that side, okay? So you've got 2 of that bond there, the 805, and then 4 of the 464, okay? Then it asked you, it told you that the reactants was 2648, asked you to do reactants minus products would give you minus 818. The overall energy change is negative. You could have written something about the reactants having less energy than the product. Then it moved on to a crude oil question. So explain how the length of the carbon chains within each fraction determines where each fraction collects in the column. Longer chains means higher boiling point. Higher boiling point means lower down in the collection of the fractional distillation, okay? This one then said that you had a carbon 15 with H32 and you had to work out how many hydrogens were left. Remember, that would have been times by 2. So 4 plus 3 would have been 7. Oh, there's a 2 there as well, okay? To work it out how many would have been left, okay? Complete the equation. That was actually a bit more difficult than you think for 1 mark. Okay, give the reaction conditions used in the process, so it's catalyst and high temperature. Give one reason why it's important for oil companies to carry out cracking is to do with supply and demand, okay? Produce alkenes for plastics. These shorter chain ones then can go on to be used like for petrol and diesel, the ones that we actually want. Give the meaning of the term isomer, same molecular formula, different structural formula, and then draw 2 isomers. Remember, it can never be on the end because the end would just be a bend. That's not actually an isomer. Okay, so I've drawn one where it's got 1 carbon coming off, and then this one's got 2 carbons coming off in the middle. Then it says, looking at empirical formula. Empirical formula is something you would have done in year 10. So it said that a hydrocarbon had 4.8, okay, it attained 7.2 of carbon, okay, 7.2 of carbon, which means it had 1.2 of hydrogen, okay. You then do the mass divided by the MR, okay, so that would have given you 0.6 and 1.2. You then divide by the smallest, okay, which would have meant that the empirical formula would be carbon 1, H2, okay, which coincides to an alkene with the general formula CnH2n, okay, and that's how you would show your workings for them. Then it was looking at Becky and David trying to make salts, okay, and they'd carried out the step-by-step process in terms of making a soluble salt, dissolve, filter, evaporate. David said it's important to know the known volume of acid in stage 1, okay. Circle whether you agree or disagree, okay? So I wrote disagree. The carbonate will be in excess, so all the acid would be used up, okay? So it doesn't matter how much acid you add because it would be in excess. Give overall balanced equation for taking place in stage 1, okay? So you had potassium carbonate. Write out the word equation below to help you. Okay, you had hydrochloric acid. Okay, that makes potassium chloride. plus water plus CO2 because it's a carbonate. Okay, 3 marks for that. Don't lose them 3 marks. Then it goes on to talk about this is a titration now. Okay, this is a titration here. Okay, Becky is concerned that stages 1 to 3 only... Carrying out stage 1 to 3 only once would mean that the volume of sulfuric acid needed in stage 4 would be larger than the actual needed, okay, to neutralise it. Suggest a reason for a concern. Yeah, you would go past the point of neutralisation. So then you'd have too much acid in there, okay. Write an ionic equation to show how water is formed during this reaction. Source of ions. You did not need the symbol equations for that, but don't hesitate, just put them in just in case, okay. The acids come, the H plus comes the acids, the OH minus comes the alkalis. That would form water. The reaction is exothermic, sketch an energy profile. So you've got your reactants, you've got your products, you've got your overall energy change. And you have got, if you wanted to, you've got your activation energy hump there. They both carried out flame tests on the salts. Give a reason why the results of both the tests could not identify them. Both salts contain potassium, so you'd have the same colour, which would be lilac. Okay. Describe a test that would enable you to tell the salts apart. Well, one of them was chloride and one of them was sulfate. So you would test that, not the potassium aspect of them. There's the test for chloride, silver nitrate, white precipitate formed. Here's the test for sulfate, barium chloride, white precipitate formed. Okay. The reason I know you're thinking, oh, it's white precipitate is because when you add the barium chloride, it's white precipitate. So you know the one with the barium chloride is the sulfate. Then we're looking at kind of a overall reaction between copper oxide and carbon. Okay, so the copper produced was 1.39. You can work that out from these values by here. Okay, actual yield was 1.39. What they thought they were going to make was 1.27. So this was kind of the wrong way around. Times by 100, 109. Okay, so the yield was over 100%. Suggest why the yield is too big is because copper oxide is likely to be impure. Write a balanced symbol equation to show the reduction of iron oxide in the blast furnace. So iron oxide reacts with the carbon monoxide to produce iron and carbon dioxide. Okay. Again, this is quite a complicated question. This is reacting masses, which is from last year. Use this equation for reacting masses. Okay. So we know that iron makes 5.1. Okay. We know that. We then know that the MR of just iron would be that based on our symbol equation because each iron is 56. And we know that the MR of iron oxide would be 160. Put it all into the equation, okay? And you should end up with that, okay? The answer said to give it in standard form, so it would have been that, okay? This question relied on an awful lot of knowledge from year 10, okay? Lot of information again. Then it says to pick which of these statements is correct. So then once you know what you're looking for, go back and read it, okay? Don't spend ages reading it unless you know what's going on, okay? The oils contain both saturated and unsaturated fats, okay? Again, this question comes up. It is more of a biology question. That means no double bond. That means a double bond, okay? Explain why the first drops of bromine water added to each of the oil samples are decolorized because they all contain unsaturated double bonds. Bromine water is added across the double bond and it turns from orange to colourless in the presence of a double bond. Okay. The label states that the new oil only contains 15% unsaturated fats. Use the results to show whether the statement is correct. Okay. So I had 30.1 from the information out of 40, times that by 100. That gave me 75% unsaturated. So that meant that it had to be 25% saturated. Explain why the results might persuade many customers to use a new brand of oil. It contains the lowest percentage of saturated fats. They're the ones, okay, that are likely to cause heart disease. Last question then in terms of a 6-marker. Nice 6-marker because it was bonding, okay. Magnesium chloride. So you've got a metal, non-metal, group 2, group 7, okay. So it's ionic bonding. So there were 2 to 3 marks then for just drawing out what ionic bonding would look like. So you've got 2 electrons in the outer shell of magnesium. They transfer, sorry, should be the right word, to 2 chlorines, okay? Magnesium's lost 2, it becomes +2. Each chlorine then has lost 1, so you've got 2 chlorines with minus, okay? Ionic bonding is the transfer of metals. I would write between a metal and a non-metal, okay? High melting point because the strong electrostatic attraction, we've talked about this before, between the positive and the negative. It's really hard to break that bond, so requires a lot of energy, gives things high melting and boiling points. Can conduct electricity when molten because the ions are free to move. It's said at the top here to talk about being able to conduct electricity and having a high melting and boiling point. Okay, so make sure you comment on the things that it asks you to talk about. Okay, again, additional paper if you need it. Table of ions, you don't need to learn it, it's there. And then your period table again, you don't need to learn that, it's there.